welcome, and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. Imagine as you're out there in an uncertain world such as the one that most of us are probably feeling we're experiencing today. That is a life where we're feeling afraid of each step we take, the uncertainty of economic times, relationships that seem unstable, and perhaps even the idea of a future that feels bleak, probably uncertain. Wouldn't it be nice if there were a way that we can discover something such as spiritual healing, where we can discover what love without limit and life without fear is like? Today, joining us on the program today is a teacher of what is known as Christian Science beliefs, and we're going to talk about spiritual healing as this person's life work and past experience with it. We'll also explain the meaning of what that love without limit and life without fear is and how it relates to physical problems and miracles. After all, I think we can all use a few miracles here and there, especially in times like this. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Fujiko Saenz. Fujiko, thank you for joining us here on the program today.
Thank you, Daniel.
So now tell us about your life work as a spiritual healer, what it means when you say spiritual healing.
Well, when I say spiritual healing, I am actually thinking and emphasizing more about our spiritual sense that everybody has, regardless of whether you have any faith background or not. In every culture, I witnessed that we have a spiritual sense that something is beyond our five senses, the physical senses, the limited senses that tries to lock us into a certain kind of box. So healing taking place using these spiritual senses, to me, one of the privileges that we have as a human being, but also as, to me, as a student of the Bible, children of God.
Now, what was it that led you in this direction with your life?
Well, I was always interested in healing, even from my childhood. But my mother actually was very much interested in non-Western, what you might call alternative medicine. I grew up in Japan. I'm from Tokyo. And she also felt that we have our own innate ability to heal ourselves. So I think that's actually a very good ground to have. And I went to Catholic school where I was taught about God's love from the nuns and wonderful priests that we had there in Japan. But also in my teenage years, I fell ill, and actually from an injury that I had from falling off the stairs, I began to study Reiki or Chi, that you're probably familiar with the name Reiki more here in America. So when I began to use Reiki or Chi to heal some of my friends, some of them came to my house, I just felt that I felt more satisfied than, studying my subjects in the school. And sure. I actually forgot about these two elements that I really loved as I went to college and then came to the United States to study and got married and had 2 children. And in my 30s, when I had this heart problem, medically diagnosed heart problem, and under a lot of stress, I sought for non-Western method of healing, but I couldn't really find the one I was familiar with in Japan. But I was led to be with a group of people who were studying the Bible and the textbook called Science and Health, the Key to the Scriptures. And just by attending the service that they had using these 2 books as their pastor, I was healed of this heart ailment just sitting. And that really made me, not right away I understood, but gradually I came to see that we really need to understand how our consciousness and a shift in consciousness can actually bring about better health. The more than what we can administer materially, like cutting things or cutting up things. So I just read more and more about prayer in general, like the books by Larry Dossey and Deepak Chopra. And, along with it, I just began to see that what medical researchers was also finding out about consciousness and body. So that's kind of my journey in a nutshell.
Now, many people become familiar, for instance, with, soul and body, or spiritual and body, spiritual body, if you will. But it seems in the Western world that there is a tendency that these two things are separate from each other. And it seems kind of difficult to look at it any other way from a Western modality mindset. But I can't see, for instance, how they could be separate when, the body helps the soul experience material reality, if you will. Mm-hmm. So when it comes to spiritual healing, first of all, in your experience, let's talk about what spiritual healing means and how that possibly affects the physical material world.
Mm-hmm. Well, when I say spiritual and spiritual sense, that sense must be coming from somewhere. And, whether the Native Americans here might call Great Spirit or Spirit, meaning God, or in my lecture I refer to love with a capital L. That's another name for God, and life is another name for life. This vast idea called the divine or God is something that we can really draw more as a resource, draw our understanding of who we are, and in a way, even in physics, like high physics, we really begin to see that reality we see, it really is based on our five senses. For example, the flowers that I may see, like a bouquet of flower that I see as with my eyes, look different by the eyes of the insects. That's scientifically known that reality is in the eye of beholder. So when I say spiritual healing, but it's not anything that's far removed from some scientific way of thinking, because it's not that reality is out there, but we can actually choose to see that our reality will be more based on our understanding of what spirit is, of what our spiritual reality might be, might feel like and look like. And I think children, in my lecture, I talk about children, and I was a mother of two small children, and they really taught me a lot about the spiritual sense of their reality. They're much freer, and they're not restricted. They live in the now, and they actually express health and activity, vitality, more than those who began to learn that somehow we have to live in fear. We have to live in limitation and expectation of the whole world, what women should be, or what a certain age group should behave, or have limitation physically. So I don't know whether I answered your question, but I think it's not really far removed when I say spiritual healing from something that we can think through scientifically, as well as through prayer, through the inspiration that we receive from the Spirit.
Well, you certainly gave a lot of clarity there, especially when you consider today we're in such a informational driven world. Social media seems to be one of those things that have replaced the idea of us connecting together one-on-one. And there really, to me, in some ways, is an inherent danger in that, because in social media, because you're removed, you're not there face-to-face with someone, people would tend to say things they normally wouldn't say, ask questions maybe they normally wouldn't ask. I mean, we actually did a whole segment on that, on what you would, I guess, call social media etiquette. And one of the, I guess, things that were brought up in this conversation was the idea that and social media etiquette, for instance, would you actually say those particular things you're saying on the computer out to the world? Would you be willing, and are you able to say that face-to-face with someone? And, of course, the unanimous answer is no, you wouldn't. I mean, look at some of the things people actually say and how they treat each other online. It's so anonymous. I can say this because there ain't anything you can do about it. And you got to realize now that somehow inherently inside of us, we feel that this is okay. And now we've been given a medium that says that okay, that's okay, excuse me. So taking a look at this from a spirituality perspective, you realize, but this isn't really what soul would do. Why would we do something like that, do you think?
Well, I guess I can say it's somehow, it is a type of ignorance, first of all, and not realizing in a way not that person is ignorant, but ignorant about knowing the power of words. The words in Chinese medicine, too, that the best medicine is, or a doctor is someone who can heal just by speaking. And we're doing sometimes the opposite thing. And, there's a tendency, there's a pull to try not to have us experience freedom, which to me is that limited sense of mind that we think we own power somehow by using these medium and the words that are very harmful to others. But what actually is what's happening is those who are writing and uttering these words that are harmful, harming themselves more than anything else, because they are the one who is hovering over, and in their consciousness, they're letting these ideas stay, as if you're letting the thieves stay in your living room, taking all the good that you already have. And I think the spiritual discipline or the study that we have has nothing to do with pressing certain religion or doctrine or creed. It's really about understanding our spirituality that can bring the ultimate freedom. And to me, Christ Jesus is the teacher there. He didn't come to teach religiosity. We know him as a central figure of Christianity, but he really came to free us from the limited way of thinking. And so, in a way, teaching us this God as love without limit and life without fear. He was fearless. But it also, at the same time, pointing out that anything that tries to limit us, the tools, the words that try to limit us, is really, in his words, lie and liar, and the father of it. It has nothing productive. It has nothing, freeing or healing. And when he said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free," that truth is universal. I live in Japan, and my clients are, Buddhists, and people in Korea would be Confucianists, and in India, the people who are Hindi, they experience the same healing when we understand more of the universal quality of what and the substance of what this truth is. So, it's really exciting time now. I think we are more and more accepting spirituality as our own an innate power, in a way, our own identity, that even if it seems like a tough time, that tough time makes us lean more towards spirit, which is good.
I couldn't agree with you more, Fujiko. I know there was something that was occurring to me as you were describing this, and that is, let's take a look at America and what's going on here in America today. We have Donald Trump as our president of the United States. And I was just talking with my wife just yesterday, in fact, and I said, not as far as I can remember in recent history have I seen a United States president so blatantly beat up by, it seems like, everybody, okay? And I said, but I don't really know that really bothers him all that much. But the point that I'd like to make here is a guy, now, if you want to take a look at the spiritual world, is probably one of the most efficient healers I can think of. Now, I'm sure people listening to this would say, what, are you out of your mind? How do you figure Donald Trump is a spiritual healer? And I simply say this, because look at all the negative stuff he's dragging out of you. What are your thoughts about something like that?
Right. I think that's really a good point, because it's not really a person or personality. We have to really see, like, everything is within our own self. If it's not healed within our own self, it's going to bother us and we'll react. When you think about the time where even the healer like Christ Jesus was around, socially speaking, nothing really seemed harmonious and good. The Jewish people were under Roman occupation. They had no rights, and here he's talking about kingdom of heaven is within you, and some people think, like, isn't he ridiculous? I think that's kind of a thing about within our own self, that if we don't find kingdom of God or heaven within our own self, no matter who is going to be the leader, we're going to be constantly being thrown off left and right. And more than ever, if he brought up the worst part of us, it's an opportunity to really re-examine what America is all about and what we're really standing for, the good that you already have. I have seen different countries, and this country is very generous. I mean, as far as I know, there's a lot of talk about immigration and, different things that you have. People are so good here, and you still have systems in place to really check and balance. So I think you're right. We might not say a person can be changing the entire society, but it can trigger us to really think more spiritually. And I heard that more people actually looking into prayer. How does prayer bring more peace to my own self instead of constantly protesting outside with the placard, or what is it called, the sign, which is really important. But we need to really see that our consciousness as a whole society need to change.
I think even more importantly, too, Fujiko, I would have to hazard a say that you need to examine how did you come to those beliefs. And if you truly believe, let's say that you're out there protesting because you're anti-immigration, or you don't believe hate speech is something that really society should come to accept or embrace, whatever it is, again, like I was saying earlier, here's someone that seems to be bringing up a lot of people's stuff. And one thing, because I actually had a direct, I wouldn't call it a confrontation, but certainly it was a slightly heated debate until I threw this at this individual, and I said, so let me ask you this. Besides running out there screaming and shouting and waving a sign around on how much you're against this, what specific actions are you taking in your life that can help to change this now without having to worry about whether that guy out there does it or she does it? What are you doing? And this is exactly what happened. They stood there dumbfounded. Okay, yeah, it's easy to shout and point your finger at what you think the problem is, but you got three fingers pointing back at you saying, what are you going to do about it personally? Why do you even have these beliefs? Now, that being said, you can see the emotional power that is now generating in your body that can now cause physical ailments. And there is no doubt that, for instance, in let's say cancer, this big war that we're having on cancer, how often we hear as you go deeper into the examination of something like this disease, that there is a tremendous emotional component there that is causing something like this and trying to wake you up to say, I think it's time for you to start examining what's going on in your life and what isn't working, because this now has become a physical manifestation to let you know, what are we going to do? How are we going to move in a different direction so that you can heal? Would you say that could be the essence of what Christian Science spiritual healing is?
Yes, I think self-examination, self-knowledge is very important. And instead of just believing a set of doctrine. We need to really see that we live the peace or the harmony that we profess that God's character to be. If we are image and likeness of this one supreme being, then we need to exhibit more of that. The patience and love. Just speaking here in Pennsylvania tonight about the transformative power of unselfishness with the rabbi and another minister. It's a panel presentation, but I think in every faith group and in society, we have to really see that what's really transformative, it really has to first happen in our own self. And I think I cannot, it's not just in Christian Science, I'm sure, but every Holy Scripture is full of this transformative power that we think we transfer this to, like, say, the machine or internet, or you think we can just push the button and change the world, or just line up to protest and scream and change the world. But I don't think that's how it happens. It's just one person at a time. And we have people, for example, in India, Gandhi started to protest with a nonviolence movement, which he was actually, that really was based on the Sermon on the Mount that he was reading, when he was in jail. You can really feel like what person can change, but not with a sense of violence, but with understanding and expectation, with this expectation that we are innately good, that we are innately intelligent, and trusting that more than somehow chasing after the so-called demons, and
right.
we end up being caught by the demon and we become one of them, like the mummy hunters becoming mummy.
Right. There is no monster out there. The monster is me. I like, earlier you were talking about children, how they live in the moment, and I think this really ties directly with what you're saying here now, is that all of us are inherently, we're good. Spirit, as we have our spirit selves, comes in with everything it needs to live a life of whatever fulfillment that you should desire. And it seems that a lot of us kind of go out into this life, and as we grow older, we start finding things may not be working out the way we thought they should or we hoped they would, and we get discouraged after disappointment, and pretty soon we just think to ourselves, well, I'm not so sure about all this, spirit this and so forth. But you go back to children, as you were saying earlier in the program, they live in the moment and they show that inherent good. And I remember reading a quick little brief story. You were talking about Deepak Chopra earlier, and he had this in a book that I was reading once, and I found it kind of, I guess, almost like seeing a rose when I was reading this, and that is, there was this little baby that was born, and the baby was probably about 2 or 3 months old, and the mother happened to go into the room when the baby's sister was hovering over, and the sister was probably about 4 years old. And this is what the mother had experienced her asking her little baby brother. So, could you please tell me what God is like? And it was though that by 4 years old, she was beginning to forget that connection. Now, this isn't for the listeners out there to say, hey, let's look at spiritual dogma or religion, but this is, here was this innocent 4-year-old girl asking her baby brother, what was God like? What is God like? I forget. Could you remind me? And that innocent exchange, when you think about that, by 4 years old, you've got some imprints going on, but certainly not religious ones. Not yet, anyway. And I found that just to be, it was a story that just always stuck with me.
Yes. And in fact, my lecture starts with, before I'm introduced, I'm playing one of the Japanese pop songs that has this whole line about when I was a child, there was God, and He delivered love to me. It's written by a Japanese songwriter, but it is so true that, and I also meet people where people say, well, when I was a child, I was always right by this warm light, and somehow along the way I lost it. And I think that sense of God is unconditional and impartial. It doesn't choose which religion. It's universal. It's infinite. And I think as an adult, of course, we lose that kind of being so busy trying to thinking that we are creating and we are managing things. But going back to this child, which is actually still within us, really is free. You can imagine like how sometimes I'm talking to someone in 70s, and I ask that person, what was it like to be a 7-year-old? What did you like to do? And sometimes I can even picture that person running by the ocean, on the beach. And I mentioned, like, that's exactly what I was thinking. And the smile that they have in their face, that freedom really should be a part of us every moment. And when we look at each other, we should connect with a child in that person instead of with, of course, title or, color of the skin and all that stuff. Children don't even see the different color of skin. So I think that's something that, as you say, imprint of education will make them start to feel they have to live in a box. And if I go out of this box, I'm going to be, somehow in danger. And we instill this fear. And that's really the fear and ignorance. Mary Baker Eddy, who is the author of this textbook, Science and Health, the Key to Scriptures, says that's really the root of all the inharmony, that fear and ignorance. So we can really be thinking, like, what part of my, thinking is kind of still restricted by these two elements.
I know it certainly would be nice if many of us can come to understand that we don't have to live a life in fear. And I know that some people might say, or maybe a lot of people, for instance, well, how did we come to a point that we began to fear life, to be afraid of life? You bring up education. I could see where that could be one component where we came to learn, we're afraid that we're not going to be able to learn enough to be able to take that test and pass it. We're afraid that if we take this action, let's say that the teacher's asking you a question and you give an answer that may not be right, that you might be ridiculed,
Right.
And I certainly had my experiences in school. As I like to say, when I was in school, I went to the principal's office so many times that I actually knew the next of kin and probably a few generations of the family. I was surprised they didn't invite me over for Thanksgiving when that came around. But, the thing is you could see how this is a learned behavior. Now, as you work with people, how often do you see that they're coming to you just filled with this fear, and what is the process like as you talk with them?
Well, I think really I have to give them not ignoring their fear or their sorrow, sadness, but really seeing how, embracing that person with that unconditional love. I'm not going to judge that person. That's where it starts.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah, and when I'm not judging, and when I have this pure sense of love, because when we love someone, we don't want that person to suffer. And I know that love comes with the desire to free that person. And even when I was in elementary school, I was struck by this almost like a wave of love one day. And I just felt that how beautiful it is to love. And not to need to even have a person to love, but somehow loving was such a beautiful, thing for me. And I challenged myself and asked, can I actually love that science teacher that everybody hates? And to my surprise, the answer was overwhelming yes. And I even thought, well, I can marry him. It's kind of precocious, but that sense of love I haven't really experienced till much later. And, this book really reminded me, Science and Health reminded me that Jesus healed by seeing the perfection in man through this love. He knew that person's you exist there because God loved that person. And so I know the precondition to healing and seeing others with that sense of completeness and wholeness is love. And so I have to nurture a sense of love within myself. I have to love myself in a way that to see a bird, for example, right now the flowers are so beautiful. And in nature, you see, even the smallest flower is loved by God, loved by the higher power, whatever you may call. And here I am, I'm able to witness this. And so if someone comes and not being able to see this love, I have a sense of desire to share this love. And, often I think of 23rd Psalms, there's a line that says, my cup runneth over. My cup runneth over, and I keep thinking, who is filling my cup? And that whole running over part, who am I give it to? So I think that's really the study of Christian Science. To me, the author says the vital part, the heart and soul of Christian Science is love. And we're learning what to understand what this love is. This God that is love without limit and life without fear. There's no judgment.
Now, certainly people listening would think, when we think of love, the first thing probably that comes to many of our minds is love. Oh, you mean like in a relationship? And I know that that's not what you're talking about here. I mean, we all have unlimited love within us. It's just, again, as I believe we were talking about earlier, we have become conditioned and learned behaviors to have that sort of squashed down, or at least blocked anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And what I was thinking of, I was just reminded of best-selling author and relationship coach Barbara DeAngelis, who was very well known in the 1980s and into the 1990s for making love work. And I caught one of her infomercials one night, and here it was. She was saying, the reason that we feel that we're in love with someone outside of ourselves is because of the way they make us feel about who they are. And I thought, wow, that's pretty profound. I'd never heard anything like that before, but the more I thought about it, the more I thought how true that is, and why people can even become relationship or love addicts. For a period of time, you get out there in that new relationship, and that person makes you feel excited, has you feeling like there ain't nothing in this world you could do. There's a glow. It's almost like you're floating. Like nothing. You know what I'm talking about. Everybody does.
I know. That's a nice feeling.
And it is. It's a wonderful feeling. And then all of a sudden, they're not making you feel that way anymore. And the next thing, this relationship isn't working. And the fact is, you depended so much on them to make you feel the way you're feeling that you forgot that was supposed to be your responsibility, wasn't it?
Right. That's so true. I think I like that what you have said, because we have to find that richness in our own lives by knowing how much people who we touch, their lives are blessed. And in return, we are blessed. And I don't think it's really like someone who has more materially blessed people. I think from my experience, people who have less things materially seems to give more, and it's because they're rich in spirit. They somehow know their happiness comes from sharing. And, it's hard to sometimes really convince other people there is such thing as unconditional love. But if we know your joy comes from giving, and you're not somehow worn out, because it's not really the self that's doing, but it's higher love, the source that it's coming from. It's not me.
Now, as we talk about this as Christian Science, people would say Christian Science. How do those two things go together? It sounds like religion and science, which we know have had polarities through the centuries. But it seems to me that more and more they seem to be coming together for one reason. They're both in search of the truth, or at least they should be.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
You're right.
and so let's talk about that a little bit.
Well, Mary Baker Eddy, when she had this experience, I would call it epiphany, which is, in dictionary it says a sudden realization of insight into reality. When she was healed, and many people probably had experienced this, it's not just Christians, but all around the world in different part of their lives or the period in the history, these healings are recorded. But I think what she really wanted to do was not dismiss this as a one-time miracle, but to find that through the scriptures and others she started to heal, that there must be principle. There must be underlying principle that allows us to experience this so-called miracle. And it is learnable. And as you probably know, some of the doctors who have seen these so-called spontaneous healing that they used to say, they're saying, like, wait a minute, we should really be examining these healings instead of feeling like, okay, this is just like rare cases, and we're just going back to the material evidences and what we can apply materially. And I think what the science part comes in is that, like you said, what is truth of our own being? What is body? What is consciousness? The science originally really means the knowledge to understand our universe. And in this case, we're trying to really go deeper into understanding our spiritual self and the spiritual universe. And that whole sense of Christian, Mary Baker Eddy, the founder and the discoverer of Christian Science, that Christian really means, in one of her writings, the highest style of man. It doesn't refer to like someone who is Christian. She says the highest style of man. And for science, she gives this definition, that which reveals and interprets God and man. And so in order to become that highest style of man, which we all strive to be, we need to know our relationship with the divine. In any way that you might connect with the divine, some people may prefer to be in the nature and be connected to this divine. But in any case, that it then in turns become and be appearing in our words and our behavior, in our action, as you were saying earlier, what we understand to be who we are. So science and Christianity, when I say Christianity, it seems like just one pie, in the pie chart, one religion. But what she really meant was the love, that Emmanuel, Christ really meaning God be with us. And everybody is with God. And so if we begin to understand our relationship with God, and we understand how more scientifically we can experience health and harmony, love, lasting and meaningful relationship in our own life.
Now, I know that people are familiar with a term known as a miracle. And not too long ago, I had a guest on the program who, interestingly enough, in his story was involved in probably the single largest sporting point-shaving scam in U.S. history.
Oh.
Now, here's a guy you would think, oh, boy. But in his book, as he was sharing his story, this is a gentleman that became a two-time felon. And that was pretty rough on this guy, because the first felony was based on the point-shaving scam, but the second thing was based on him. He was actually doing all the right things in the world of business, But because he got that sign on his back, the law decided, well, we don't care that you played above the law. We're going to get you anyway because we see this as that super prize we're getting out of the cereal box. So they just didn't care. But through this, he was beginning to learn quite a bit about himself. Now, he had a son who apparently went into the doctor, and in this son's heart, although at that moment wasn't critically in danger, had a hole in his heart that was about almost the size of a quarter. And so they were about to take him in for surgery. Again, they suggested, let's take care of this now because maybe later on in life, as maybe he's 5 or 6 or whatever, how many, this could become a problem. So as he went in to go in for surgery, they're sitting out in the waiting room, and the next thing you know, the doctor comes out and he says, you know what, we've got a real concern here. And of course, this guy's thinking to himself, goodness gracious, I've already brought enough into my life. What next? You can just imagine. And he says, it looks to me like we're not going to have to be doing surgery as that hole no longer exists. And you could see probably, and I'm just saying probably, and it wasn't that he suggested this directly in his story, but that he says, as I began to change and see the miracle or the beauty of being alive, to feel what it's like to have wonderful people around me and to have, even though it didn't seem like a second chance, another chance to step forward and begin to live and do what could be considered to be the right things, not by anybody else, but by his own standards. That there's a possibility that his son began picking up on that love, as we're talking about here, and the body miraculously changed and healed without surgery that hole in his heart. Now, that could be considered, and he even said so, here is a miracle. Now, let me ask you this. Somebody without any earthly experience, we'll use the alien thing, if you will, comes to Earth and says, I'm here because our planet is confused about a particular word that you seem to use here, and that is the word miracle. How would you describe that to them?
Well, I think we actually have the definition in a textbook that says that which is divinely natural but must be learned humanly, a phenomenon of science. So to that alien, I would explain that it's something that in our limited senses we don't see. That when we expand our sense and consciousness of reality, we see what our human eyes previously may not be able to see. And in fact, aliens may actually understand this more than we do. The fact that they are already there, to come to Earth. They probably overcame this limitation of physics to be able to see us. So I'm probably asking them, how do you do it? But I have an interesting story which I would be sharing in the lecture. This cardiologist, since you mentioned the heart problem, the cardiologist in Boston area called Bernard Lowndes, he received a Nobel Peace Prize in 1985 for forming a group called Physicians Against Nuclear Warheads. And he's a co-founder of a group called Physicians for Social Conscience. So he's not just, cardiologist. He really cares about society and human beings. But anyway, I listened to his interview on a radio program called Infinite Mind. It was a National Public Radio program. And in it, he was describing that a patient was brought in after a massive heart attack, not just one heart attack. And they didn't really know what to do with him. But one day, that patient started to improve, and in 2 weeks, he left the hospital. And so when the patient came back for a, checkup, the doctor obviously was so, surprised and thought it was a miracle, asked him what had happened. And the patient said, Doctor, I remember exactly the date and time I started to improve. So he said, yeah, please tell me, I really need to know. And he said that all these doctors were coming in and out wanting to know what was wrong, and they didn't really know what to do. And but Dr. Lowney obviously, apparently said to the rest of the doctors and interns, go listen to his patient's heartbeat for the wholesome gallop. That's what he remembered. And he looked at the clock and remembered what time it was. Now I'm asking you, Daniel, when I say wholesome gallop, what comes to your mind?
Now, did you say wholesome gallop?
Gallop, yeah.
As in a galloping horse?
Yes.
I'm kind of confused. I don't think I've heard anything like that.
Right. But the patient didn't either. But wholesome really means healthy, right?
Sure.
Wholesome, really strong. And gallop, when you think of horses galloping, there's an image of strength and, movement. And that's what he really got it from that small, short sentence that he was whispering to others. What he didn't know was that in cardiology, gallop means a gap, between the heartbeats. And it was so bad that he was cynically saying wholesome because he'd never seen such bad case, in his life. But to a patient, it was something that gave him hope. And so, since I'm studying this textbook, it has a Science and Health chapter in physiology. It says, the author says, a patient's belief is more or less molded and formed by his doctor's belief in the case, even though the doctor says nothing to support his theory. His thoughts and his patient's commingle, and the stronger thoughts rule the weaker. Hence, the importance that doctors be Christian Scientists. I think this really talks about, whether it's Alien asking me about miracle or others asking me, that it's not just mind and body, but we have to really see, going back to the power of words, are we influenced by the outside power, or are you trusting that something that you always innately had within our own self to choose, that your wholesome, the health actually was always there? And the doctor asked himself, how did the heart reconstruct itself in 2 weeks? It's impossible. So he called it miracle, but then he realized that in his practices, ever since he was an intern, there were so many evidences when doctors had expressed either discouraging description of the patient's case or hopeful case, that the cases would turn around in either way. And so he was wrote a book called The Lost Art of Healing, and understanding that we have to, as a patient and physicians, really not already give a conclusion. Sometimes we're told, okay, you only live for 3 months or 6 months. He was saying that life, as we see from the evidences that he had seen, we cannot know everything about that person. So it's interesting to read that book because he talks a lot about talking to the patient, and some cases that he didn't have to touch any, scalpel to heal or mend things. And he said in the interview, somewhere in the Bible it says, first bind up the broken heart. So now, it's interesting about miracle that is it something that we're all supposed to do, help one another find ways to mend our heart, the broken heart? We will have much better relationship and society. Maybe more health, so less expensive health care. We can
certainly
care about health more than caring about diseases.
I know when you talk about doctors and the idea of miraculous healings, you have to consider, for instance, that doctors, are really taking educated guesses.
Mm-hmm.
And so there you can see the linear point, the starting point. Well, if they're taking educated guesses, that means they've had an education. And that education is based on a system that's already in place. So in other words, they're guessing from a system that already exists.
Right.
See? So for them to say, well, this is a miracle means they have discovered something outside of a realm that was already in place. And I even had a guest say, well, think, a miracle is just something that we haven't experienced before.
Mm.
It's a way of looking at it. When he put it that way, it seemed that miracles are really inherently something that we're all capable of experiencing. That it isn't for that spiritual guy on the mount, for instance, or whatever it may be, that it's really in all of us. And this, from my understanding and from remembering what you said earlier, can be a learned behavior. Is that true?
Yes, yes. And it really shouldn't cost a lot. If somebody is paying so much to get help, something needs to be re-examined. Because then it's just like that relationship that you were talking about. Let's fall in love with this person, and you feel good for a while, but then you just kind of lose that spark. But it's the same thing with health. It's not something that we can superficially buy, but we need to go deeper and say, what am I cherishing every day? Where is the sense of love for my own self before needing to serve others? Because a lot of the time I'm experiencing through my clients that they are so conditioned to love others and take care of others, and they forget to take care of themselves. And we're told to love our neighbors as ourselves. So, it's not a selfish thing to find that more permanent, stable love for our own selves. And really that's coming from a much higher source. That when I look at, and the nature really helps me to remind me of this, because, things pass. The winter comes, the spring comes, summer comes, and it's just like our own lives. We have different phases we have to get through, and sometimes we have to wait for the flowers to bloom, but we know it's going to come. And we just have to really trust that we are not personally responsible for other people's happiness or for even ours. We just have to yield to much higher sense of love in life.
Well, Fujiko, first of all, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to join us on the program to share with our listeners how they can love without limit and have a life without fear. And you can certainly see the more unlimited your love gets, the less fear you're going to have in your life in the first place. Wouldn't that kind of be how that works?
Yes.
I mean, think about it. When we were talking about being in love earlier, you're not afraid of anything then. You can't wait to just get to it.
Well, practice makes perfect. So, we're not always 100% there, but I love challenges, so that makes me grow.
So let me ask you this. As someone comes to you, and for our listeners out there, how can they take that first step in the direction to begin to experience and build that abundance of love and begin to deteriorate the fear that they're experiencing in their life? What is at least one or two things you can suggest they can start doing right now, right after this, that they can move in that direction?
Well, I think taking time for their own self, even if it's 3 minutes. Sometimes I ask people to set the time, the timer, 5 minutes. Just think of love with a capital L, and just wait. So just really a sense of listening we're going to cultivate. It's not our noises that keep saying, like, oh, what am I supposed to do this, noon, or someone you're entertaining this evening. You just shut out that. And I think that's what Jesus was talking about when he said, walk into the closet. And the closet is our consciousness that we need to really protect. That's our living room. That's the living room where we're going to receive a lot of angel voices that we say angel speaking to us, and the more we have that moment throughout the day, even in the train or buses, you just go inside that closet. And interestingly, now when I did some study on the word closet, it's a cousin word for now. So
really? Wow.
Yes, you walking.
Because we think of closets as something that we're going to deal with later, if at all.
Right, closet.
But it means now. That's something I've never heard before.
It's now, and so that means like consciousness can only be in that now. I cannot be in the past and future at the same time. So even if I had an argument with you three seconds ago, I cannot take that into my closet. It's completely pure, serene, and that closet is now, beginning anew every moment. So I would suggest that to anyone who may be interested in, learning to love yourself first.
Well, Fujiko, I want to thank you so much for sharing that insightful wisdom. Now we can actually take and let's turn that cliche we always hear upside down. Oh, you've got skeletons in your closet. No, I'm in the closet. There's a good reason for it. And I'm not coming out until I'm ready.
That's a good one. Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you again so much for being on the program. Is there a website people can go to find out more about perhaps Christian Science events that might be in their neighborhood, exploring this further, good readings, things like that?
Well, the first thing is that Thursday, May 11th at 7 p.m., the Old Church, 1422 Southwest 11th Avenue. I will be speaking for about an hour, and people can come up and ask questions afterwards. In the local churches, they have a website, PDXCS. I guess it's PD as in Portland, and then XCS in Christian Science, lectures.org. And you can also go to christianscience.com. It has so many resources there that you can start to read. And also there's a reading room, Christian Science reading room in your area that you can go, anyone can go and borrow books. I didn't buy books for a long time, I just borrowed them to check it out. There are different periodicals that you can borrow, but you can read some of them on website. If you're interested in getting this textbook, Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, you can get that at the online or at the reading room. But thank you so much, Daniel, for your insightful questions, and I love being with you for this past hour.
It was a wonderful time, Fujiko. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in. Now that you can move forward into a life of boundless love and limited fear, or at least no fear at all, one of the things you can do is strike out on a journey and discover us at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. We do encourage you to sign up for our weekly e-newsletter so that you can stay up to date with what's going on in the world of Beyond 50, as well as our upcoming shows. We can also be followed at Twitter at Beyond 50 Radio, as well as Facebook. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 Radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.